Hello and welcome to Stock Club, the home of great conversation about outstanding stocks. Over the last few years, I've had the pleasure of interviewing some incredible thought leaders, such as Brett Winton, who is ARK Invest's chief futurist, Chris Mayer, who's author of 100 Baggers on Where to Find Them, and Morgan Housel, author of international bestseller, The Psychology of Money. Well, today I'm joined by Susan Kennedy, the chairman and CEO of Cadiz. I thought it'd be a very pertinent conversation today with Ms. Kennedy because of the recent events in LA, where the world's attention was turned to water in California. And the reason for that is Cadiz is a clean water solutions company based in Southern California, so there's a lot to consider and discuss. Susan has had a distinguished career both in the public and private sectors. She served as California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's chief of staff and cabinet secretary to Governor Gray Davis. From 2003-2006, she was a commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission, CPUC, overseeing efforts to ensure that water utilities delivered clean, safe, and reliable water to customers at reasonable rates. In the private sector, Susan was the founding CEO of Advanced Microgrid Solutions, a company specializing in distributed energy resources. And today at Cadiz, Susan is leading the company's efforts to sustainably deliver clean, reliable, and affordable water to communities in need. Under her leadership, Cadiz is focusing on water supply, storage, conveyance, and treatment solutions, including the conversion of idle oil and gas pipeline to transport water across desert communities. Susan, welcome to the show.
Emmet, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Your resume speaks volumes, but to the average listener, not that our listeners are average, not one but two names jump out of that preamble. The first is your name, Kennedy, which has a rich Irish heritage, and the second is Schwarzenegger. So I'd like to kick off with a fun question, which is, what was Arnie like to work with?
Well, let me start by saying my mother's maiden name was Ryan, so I come from a very, very proud history of Irish people, and but working with Arnold was it kind of ruined me for working in politics because he was unlike any politician I'd ever worked for. He really believed that anything was possible if you put your mind to it, and if you weren't having fun, you were just doing it wrong. So we had more fun than you should be allowed to have working in government.
That's one. I presume he's a friend now, and you stay in contact.
We stay in very close contact. He's a good man and a good friend.
That's wonderful. Susan, here in Ireland, relatively clean water falls on our head for a sizable portion of the year. So as a nation, we're somewhat less used to thinking about its availability. So before we dive into Cadiz and the work you're doing there, could you give me a brief history of water as a utility in California?
Let's start with one basic fact. The Earth is called the water planet for a reason. We have 70% of the Earth's surface is covered in water. We have the same amount of water on the planet today than we have had for 4 billion years. Water doesn't leave the planet, right? It doesn't evaporate into space. It just transitions from the oceans to the snow caps, to the rain, to the rivers, and back to the oceans, right? And so water for human consumption has been one of the greatest infrastructure challenges since civilization began, from the Roman aqueducts and the thousands of years ago, and the Egyptians and the Chinese moving water from the snowpacks and the snow melt down to where it can be used, where people live in the villages, was some of the greatest infrastructure investments made for over thousands of years. We still use some of those designs today. Thousands of years later,
amazing.
We use open air canals and aqueducts, and an entire infrastructure was built around the concept of the snowpack. That's where water is stored for human consumption, is in the snowpack, right? And then as it melts into the rivers, we created reservoirs at the base of where the snow melts so that we can collect it in the spring and then use it in the summer and wait for the fall again and the winter again. And so our investment in the availability of water is really about the trillions of dollars that have been spent on the infrastructure to capture, store, treat, and move water.
Mm. Mm.
So the way we've built infrastructure in North America in particular, but in many developed countries, is a utility business model, right? So we have investor-owned utilities, a monopoly right to invest in the infrastructure to serve these communities, and they develop the 100-mile canals that bring water in California from the eastern Sierras and Owens Valley down to Los Angeles, and Los Angeles was built upon that infrastructure. And the same is true all throughout the Southwest, which is generally a desert area in the Southwest. And so they've moved water from its obvious sources in the mountains to be able to serve these populations. But the utility business model is based upon the haves. Right? You have money, you have real estate, you pay taxes, you pay utility bills, and so your utility, you have municipal ability to finance infrastructure, and so that infrastructure is there to serve that municipality. Well, as the populations have grown and people have moved out of into areas that don't have that original infrastructure, we've had great challenges building the electric grid and water infrastructure and critical infrastructure to serve the growing populations in these other areas. And so what happened 30 years ago, about 30 years, around 1980 was when we had our first whiplash event in California. We went from extreme drought. I remember because I was moving to California during that time, from the East Coast. I was about 20 years old and coming out to California, and they had just experienced this horrific drought, long. And then the next year, it was horrific rain. I mean, it was the first what we call a whiplash event, going from extreme drought to extreme precipitation in a very short period of time. Ever since then, the pattern of drought versus atmospheric rivers is so extreme that the extreme is now the new normal. Well, our infrastructure wasn't built for that. Now the water is falling in different places. As the water is coming down is rain in the south, not snow in the north. So we don't have the ability to actually capture all of that melting snow or the rainwater. And so the ability to invest in new infrastructure to be able to handle this new hydrology is not going to come from the utility business model, because those ratepayers are not going to pay for new infrastructure hundreds of miles in another direction.
Mm.
So we've now the door is now open for private sector investment into critical infrastructure, including water, as it has never been before, with the right business model. And so we're in a whole new world. The fires in Los Angeles just really took what was an urgent situation into an emergency in terms of being able to invest in this infrastructure to get water to where it's needed.
While you're in history mode, because this is truly fascinating, even the concept that there's only ever been so much water on the planet is something that, as soon as you said it, is obvious. It's like a light bulb going on, but I never thought about it like that. I mean, in school, we're taught about energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's just converted from one form to another. But when you just bring that focal point onto water, it just is truly fascinating. So while you're kind of telling about the evolution, could you describe the origin story of Cadiz Water? Just tell me a little about the business. We'll dive in a moment.
Yeah, well, Cadiz, our founders in the 1980s used satellite imaging from NASA to identify patterns on the desert surface down in southeastern California, up in the high desert, eastern Mojave Desert, and they could tell from the patterns on the surface that under the ground there was a massive water resource.
Wow.
Water is basically captured in watersheds, where water that falls on the inside of the watershed, it's like a bowl where it gets captured inside the bowl. And you could see the patterns of the ring of mountains around up above Cadiz, that there was a massive bowl, and that water had been collecting in this for thousands and thousands of years. So they bought up a bunch of land out in the desert, and it took 15 years at least to put together, do all the land swaps with the railroad and the federal government to get some contiguous land right in this one location called Fenner Gap. which is at the bottom of the watershed, the very bottom of the watershed, where all of the water has to exit and go past one point, Fenner Gap. So we're sitting at the base of a bathtub where the top of the bathtub is 7,500 foot elevation, where there's constant snow and rain, down at 900 feet where the ranch is located, where all the water needs to pass that spot to exit the watershed. And there's 1,000 years of water in the ground.
It's incredible. So
So
Cadiz
it is,
owns that water.
Cadiz owns the land that all of the water crosses, and we're the only pumper. Everything above us in the watershed is all federal land. It's
Oh,
all,
I
you can't
see.
build there.
So can you explain the Cadiz business model? Like, how does Cadiz make money? And more to the point, how will Cadiz make money?
So Cadiz, we are an asset-based company, right? So we have 45,000 acres of land.
Yeah.
We have water rights that allow us not only to take water for farming, right, out of the ground and use it on our land, but we also have a permit that allows us to export the water, put it into pipelines, and move and send it to nearby communities. That's a very valuable permit, right? Millions of acre feet of water. We also own pipelines. We bought pipeline assets, including a 220-mile pipeline that was originally built for oil 30 years ago. It was converted to gas, but it was never put into service. So it's a 220-mile empty pipeline that's just been under protection with a
Wow.
nitrogen blanket for 25 years. And then we purchased a right-of-way along an existing railroad line, so we can actually build inside their own right of way, no new disturbed land, to go south and connect us. So between these pipeline assets, we can connect our groundwater bank to all the major water networks that are built to serve the Southwest. So not only do we have water rights, millions of acre feet of water available, it's every drop of water that crosses our ranch is only 3 miles away from evaporation at the desert dry lakes.
Right.
So
Right.
we're conserving water by capturing it, intercepting it just before it hits the dry lakes. And so it's all new water supply. Plus, we can actually pump water using our pipelines. We can pump water into the aquifer from, say, the Colorado River sources and store it underground in the aquifer until it's needed during a drought. So it's a very large underground reservoir. Plus it's new water supply, and we have pipelines. So these assets are worth billions.
Wow.
If you just think of it as sitting on top of a gold mine.
Yeah.
Know how much gold is under you. You don't know exactly how much, but you have an idea of how much gold, and it's about how do you get it out and what the price is going to be at some future date. So how do you value those assets? The market comps that are out there for water supply and water storage, puts the value of our assets in the, between $5 and $10 billion.
But who pays the Cadiz invoices when the business has hit like steady state? And we'll go there in a moment. Who's the end customer? Is it the person who turns on the tap? The utility companies.
It's the utilities, and it's the communities that need to buy water.
I see.
Right. So the city of Phoenix, the city of Los Angeles, the city of the water districts that serve municipalities. So the first customers for the capacity of our northern pipeline include 2 investor-owned utilities that serve major cities, because they have to purchase water for all of their cities, and 2 water districts, which are government entities that are designed to serve the ratepayers in certain geographic areas. So those and the last one is a housing developer, because in California you need to identify long-term water supply to build any new housing. And so you purchase water supply from wherever you can get it. Water trades mostly on paper, right?
Yeah.
And then you exchange water that's in our aquifer for water that's in storage in Lake Mead. Water that's in our aquifer for water that's in a reservoir up in Northern California. So water wants to trade on paper and then physically move where it's least costly to move.
Of course.
Right?
Of course. Yeah, I did notice the revenue profile of Cadiz, just like the proverbial tap, went from stop to go in recent times. I heard you say in an interview that we're at the Cadiz is at the 10-yard line, which I presume is an American football term with respect to the development. So what's required to reach the end zone? Is that the right term for you to get to the end zone of the
It's the
pitch?
right football term, yes. Um,
Oh,
our football. We every major infrastructure project, particularly in California, uh, is takes decades to build because
mm,
usually it's done by utilities, and every utility has to do years of planning. They have to bake it into their rates they're going to charge their customers, and then the design. We have a very, very strict environmental laws here that allows any
mm,
opponents to sue and just say, well, you didn't study this, or you should have looked at that, or you didn't consult with this local community. So it's a very long, very litigious process.
mm,
Cadiz has 20 years of litigation in the rearview mirror. This project 20 years ago was opposed by all the environmentalists who didn't want any new water supply to support housing. And it was opposed by some of the most powerful politicians in California because nobody needed water in California 20 years ago. We were rolling in water. No one thought about
sure.
water supply as an issue. And so it was really easy to just oppose this project saying it's not needed or you didn't study X. And so it was really buried, but the company was really smart. They invested in the assets, they invested in the
Mm,
infrastructure, knowing that California, that this water is going to get more and more and more valuable, every year that goes by. And so they went through all of the litigation, challenging the environmental studies, challenging the permits, and came out with bulletproof permits. There's no more
mm.
challenges available. And so we're now in project finance mode. We're now in
Oh, I
who are the
see.
investors that are going to come in and own the infrastructure. And because we have land and water assets, and we also have water technology assets for treatment, which I'll talk about in a
Sure.
second. But we don't. It's way too expensive for a private company to own and operate these assets with our cost of capital and then sell the cost of the water to these agencies would be astronomical. It would be
I
like
see.
have you ever seen desalination plants? There's some private companies that built desalination plants. The cost of the water that comes out the other end is very, very high. And so
I'm not surprised. I mean, these are mega
they're
structures.
mega structures, right?
Yeah.
So the way water projects like ours get built is public entities come in. They have very low cost of capital, and they
Mm.
basically own and operate the infrastructure, and then to serve, and that's how you get the infrastructure built. So we've been looking for the right public sponsors, right public partners for the last several years, and we now have the best public partners imaginable, which is we partnered with Native American tribes. And
So, are the Native American tribes, are they financing the construction, or are they going to be owners
owners
of the?
owners and owners of the physical infrastructure,
Wow.
and yes, they're going to finance the construction. So it is
Wow.
they'll be
That's pretty
majority
cool.
investors. Yeah, no, it's groundbreaking. It's the first in the history of the U.S. where and these are communities that they need water. They have some water rights, but it's challenging. And they've got money because a lot of these Native American tribes are very, very successful gaming tribes, or they
Yeah.
are very
Yes.
successful in investing in businesses. So they act like a very sophisticated private investors, but they're also government agencies which have the same access to very low cost of capital as any other public water agency. And so they're coming in as majority equity holders in the infrastructure itself. They'll own the pipelines.
That's very cool. I mean, you've aligned with the very people
The have
who
nots.
you most need to align with, and that is just awesome. So a few months ago, I think you had about 85% of the long pipe that you mentioned, the 220-mile pipe. It's 85% of its capacity. Is that correct?
That's correct. In the Northern Pipeline.
In the Northern Pipeline. So do you expect to contract for the full 100%? And if so, how much water will you lock up in these
That
contracts?
Northern Pipeline that's the one that we purchased from El Paso
Yes.
Natural Gas. It's a
Right.
30-inch steel, so it can hold about 25,000 acre feet of water in that direction.
Right.
1 acre, 1 foot deep. Our permit
Wow.
for new supply is for 50,000 acre feet
Okay.
per year
Okay.
for 50 years. So half the supply from our current permit can fit in that northern pipeline for the throughput capacity. So we're at 85%, which is the magic percent. We don't want to contract for the entire 100 because we need some flexibility to be able
Yeah,
to take
bandwidth.
advantage of some opportunities for water.
Sure.
And we will immediately start contracting for the southern pipeline, which is a new construction. But we know exactly where that water supply needs to go and who needs it. So we'll start contracting for that. Once we had those contracts in place, again, these are water agencies and investor-owned utilities. Each of those contracting agencies expects to pay their portion of the capital costs for constructing the pipeline. So there are fees baked in that will go to the new partnership with the tribes to pay for the infrastructure development.
Mm.
And
You've been,
right,
oh, sorry, Susan, go ahead.
I was going to say that the key to success to getting us from concept to construction is having the contracts in place to have the agencies that are willing to pay for the capex and having the public agency sponsors that are putting up the construction financing. So we now have those two magic pieces together, and we're now closing those deals to get the financing structure in place, and we expect to be beginning hardcore construction in this year.
I think before the hard hats, I'm kind of reading that the two most important skills in Cadiz was a legal background or a financial engineering background, because of from what you've described so far, it's nearly one or
Water
the
is
other.
water is so political that the most needed skill was actually political.
Interesting. Yes, actually, well, that suddenly makes sense, of course. And that's where I presume your skills come to play.
There's a reason why they recruited me to come in at this time, because we've
Okay.
never had a problem with permits. We've never had a problem with legal, right? It's been the politics of
Uh-huh.
getting, being able to navigate the opposition to any new water supply, and just the process itself. The stakeholder process is
Right.
so challenging, but everything changed in the last couple of years, and this last round of fires it just happened in Los Angeles, really turned everything, water infrastructure, into an emergency. So I expect to be at a lot of tailwind to getting to construction now.
Well, maybe that last statement it has prompted a question from me, which is, you've been CEO for about a year, and I think you joined the board. Is that
Right, two
correct?
years ago. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I joined the board 3 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Sorry, and CEO for about a year. So, in the time where you've been involved in Cadiz as the CEO, or when you were at the board, what has been the biggest challenge to this point? Is it the political aspect that you described?
The biggest challenge has been coming out from under 20 years of misinformation about
Mm,
how much water is there. People don't believe there's that much water in the desert. And
yeah,
we've had to bring in the scientists and do the studies. And actually, I had to use cameras down the wells to show how much water is in this aquifer, because it was so hidden by politics over the last 20 years that no one looked at the science. And
yeah,
so, I had to come in and basically reintroduce not only the company, but I had to prove to people that there's more water sitting in Southern California in our aquifer system than there is in Lake Mead. That's the largest surface reservoir in the United States. There's
yeah.
more water in the largest reservoir in the United States times two.
Oh, that's absolutely insane. You could flood California with what you've got under the ground.
And we're not the only place. I mean, we've never had to look for water where it's not obvious, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I just read something the other day about they found several trillion gallons of water in rock aquifers in Oregon, just north of California, twice, 2 times the size of Lake Mead. It's in like a volcanic system well below the surface. I'm not sure how they get it out,
mm.
but it's just evidence that there is a tremendous amount of water available. We just have to build the infrastructure to move it to where it's needed.
You had a corporate update call recently, and I was wondering, what were the biggest takeaways from that? Because I certainly didn't get to listen in, and I'm sure some of our listeners did. But what were the key takeaways from your last corporate call?
I think the major takeaway is that what happened with the fires in Los Angeles has created a level of urgency
Mm,
that I think will dramatically expedite our ability to build the project.
Yeah.
And it's an emergency. And I actually, over the weekend, this past weekend, the new administration issued a series of, as you may already know, they issued a series of executive orders
Mm.
to streamline things. And just 2 days ago, they issued an executive order that streamlines all the construction permitting for water storage projects and pipeline projects in California.
So
So
President Trump's executive orders have just cleared a load of red tape. Would that be like a very
yes,
simplistic way to
yes.
describe
I
it?
mean, yes,
Uh-huh.
and we believe that it will dramatically speed up the permitting process, the
And
last few permits.
that's exciting. Has Cadiz been able to help in the aftermath of the LA wildfires? I don't think I can. Apart from elections, there's rarely been an American event that captured the attention of the world in the last 24 months like the LA wildfires. Has Cadiz been able to lean in some way?
You know, we found a way to do it because I worked with Arnold Schwarzenegger when we had a very similar. Actually, now that we look back at it, compared to this, it was a minor, but we had a very serious firestorm when we were in office, and so
Hmm.
I had to find a way that we could be helpful. Our supply is way too far away to be able to help
Sure.
Los Angeles, but so what we did was we partnered with all of our water agencies. We hired former firefighters that have water tenders, water trucks, and we took a fleet of water trucks and drove them down to the command center, the incident center, and parked them and made them available. Those are the water trucks that go into communities and support firefighting when supplies are low. And so that was the best we can. And it was all privately funded with us and our partners.
Well done. I mean, one of the questions that springs to my mind, and it's a very obvious question. I feel like a three-year-old asking it, but like, what do you think is needed to avoid disasters like the LA wildfire again? And by the way, I do know that Cadiz, like the role you've played has already been significant, but more to the point, like when LA as a city gets introspective, what needs to be done to avoid a recurrence of this?
Well, that answer is twofold. One is the science of these fires to begin
Hmm.
at the start. So let me hold on that for a second.
Sure.
But in terms of water and what can be done to help mitigate or prevent or respond more quickly, is our water infrastructure needs to be updated. And to the extent that every drop of water that we create out where we are in the Inland Empire, San Bernardino County, that means more water is going to be available to go to Los Angeles from State Water Project and other sources. So, the more we invest in new water supplies where we are,
Hmm.
means that we won't have to take water from Northern California to pump it all the way out to the Mojave Desert for all those communities out there. That means more water for Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So that's number one, is invest in the infrastructure to use all of our water resources wisely so that more water can go where it needs to go. And that is right now, that part of Los Angeles is very water infrastructure poor. And
Hmm.
so that's one way we can help.
Yeah.
The second is really, having been through this, that was a blowtorch. Okay. Nothing short of a atmospheric river rainstorm would have
Whoa.
prevented that from being as destructive. If it was those winds in January, unheard of. How do you prepare for that?
Yeah.
There was
Hmm.
a reservoir that was under construction, that was under repairs, there's a lot of criticism that the reservoir was out of service. When are you supposed to repair your reservoirs if not in January?
Mm.
When
Yeah.
that's when you're supposed to be able to do your repairs on your equipment, because they don't have to be ready until the spring. And so this was a very unusual
Mm.
event, but I am terrified that this is the new normal.
Yes, I think we all are, no matter where you live in the world. So let's moving away from the wildfires for the time being. What were the key success factors behind Cadiz in 2024? Because it looked like a good year when I was doing my research. It looked like a great year. What were the key success factors?
I would say the number one, having those water. We talk about the fires, but one of the real pivotal events for us
Mm.
was 3 years ago when the Southwest was in the middle of a 1,200-year drought. That
Mm.
was the worst drought that we had seen in 1,200 years in the Southwest. everything changed about the politics of the water in the Southwest 3 years ago. So what that did was it allowed all the water agencies that need new water supplies to get past the historic opposition to a project like ours and sign up for water supply. Those contracts are what allows us to move forward with project financing and construction. So that was the single most important event in 2024, was signing up the capacity of the Northern Pipeline so that we can build off those contracts. The second was partnering with the tribes. Partnering not only with the tribes, but all of the disadvantaged communities that don't have the resources to invest in their own infrastructure. They are joining in a coalition with the tribes to invest in the infrastructure. They're all eligible for the grant funding. California is putting a tremendous amount of money, bond funding into grants for infrastructure to serve underserved communities and disadvantaged communities. So by creating this coalition of disadvantaged communities, we have excellent financing resources to be able to access the construction capital, the equity capital we need for construction, the grant funding for infrastructure. So the economics of this project are very, very good. So partnering with the tribes was a pivotal event.
It really sounds like the transition from a career in politics to leading a public company. It was this, your role right now feels like, it's a halfway house. You're actually deploying all of your political skills. Would that be right?
Yeah, I believe so. But we're also, the type of company we are, I think it's very advantageous, very, very, how do I say this? I mean, it's a great business model. We're not just a project looking for a public sponsor for a project company. We now have assets that can be monetized across a much bigger region. So water supply, water storage, water conveyance. We also purchased a company called ATEC Filtration Systems, which is the best I've seen in the market. They were so cost effective. We used it on our own ranch to treat water for chromium-6 in the water, and it was so cost effective. We bought the company, and now we're able to provide not just water supply, but we can pair water treatment with supply, which has an accretive value in terms of revenues to the company. So as a business model, having vertically integrated suite of assets, technology, water supply, water storage, water conveyance, gives us the ability to monetize those assets in a way that creates multiple discrete revenue streams to the company. Cadiz will become a parent company. And there's more water available, there's more pipelines available, there's more water products available. We can actually replicate this project model over and over again. So as a business model, it's a much more effective, cost-efficient business model and a very scalable business model for the company.
So you talk about we've talked about several different technologies that sit under the Cadiz family of assets, if you like. And in my introduction, I mentioned that you were the founder of a business called Advanced Microgrid Solutions. And in there, you built the first AI platform for trading renewable energy. Do you have plans to embrace a similar technology at Cadiz? Like, can you bring that learning into your business now?
It's such a great question. I think that there is, I'm dying to get to this. It's definitely on my roadmap.
Oh, great.
When we started AMS, this was to figure out how do you integrate battery technology, wind farms with all sorts of different physical constraints in terms of getting electricity to the grid. And we developed an AI system where wind farms were bidding themselves into wholesale markets, based on anticipated constraints on the grid and physical constraints of energy. And water is doing, and at the time when we started AMS, most energy trading was still being done with Excel spreadsheets and guys on telephones, right?
Wow.
Traders on telephones. And so the same is true in water. They're still trading water with spreadsheets and getting, weather reports, basically. I mean, they're getting more sophisticated in terms of being able to predict, but there is no platform for trading water cost effectively across, a broader market based upon with predictive technology around what's going to happen to water supply from the Rocky Mountains. What's going to
Yeah.
happen to demand when the temperature goes up to 109 degrees for 10 days? So I can't wait to actually take the exact same AI technology that we developed for AMS and apply it to water.
Wow. So, like a stock exchange for water or a market maker for water, just makes perfect sense. Why isn't it always on? And why isn't that price always available? It just makes perfect sense.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. And water rights are stuck in 100-year-old rules, right? And
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have part of the reason we have so many millions of gallons of water flowing out to the ocean instead of being stored is because under the archaic use it or lose it rules of water rights in California,
Mm,
they can't afford not to take the water and let it go to the ocean, because if they don't use it, the water rights could go to someone else. So
yeah.
there's a lot to break through. But the most important thing is being able to predict what is the best way to, what do you do with this water? Do I store it here? Do I move it here and store it there? Do I use this water and wait for this water to become available before I pump it over the Tehachapi's? There's a lot of decisions that could be made about the cost of moving and storing water that can make a market much more efficient with this technology, and that's what I hope to develop.
I think that's a perfect segue into what will probably be my second last question. And it is this: what's your vision for Cadiz in the next 5 to 10 years? Because here at Stock Club and the investors that listen to this podcast are long term buy and hold investors. They buy a business because they believe in its long term vision. Could you tell me, what does Cadiz look like, if all goes well, in 5 years and in 10 years?
5 years, we have the largest groundwater bank in operation in the southwestern US, with not only our northern pipeline and our southern pipeline system, but there's other pipelines that I want to buy. So we've got multiple pipelines moving water in and out of the largest groundwater bank. We are trading water across the West, using the ground, not only the groundwater that's in our bank, but we're trading it for water at a premium for water that's stored elsewhere. So I think we become the largest groundwater banking operation in the Western United States. Number one, the water filtration technology that we purchased is, I think, a hugely scalable opportunity for us. We are now we treat their bread and butter of this company was treating iron and manganese, which is around the world a problematic contaminant. We also created filters to treat arsenic and chromium-6, which are if you remember the Aaron Brockovich film Chromium-6, right? So those are very expensive to treat. And then we just signed an agreement in the last several months to create a new medium, to use a new medium to treat forever chemicals, PFAS,
Hmm.
which, as you probably know, is a very expensive problem to treat around the world. And so this part of the Cadiz family of businesses, I think, is one of the most highly scalable aspects worldwide. So I want to see that 5 years from now. I want to see that scaled, and I also want to see my AI platform for water being addressed. So Cadiz as a company, CDZI, the ticker, is a parent company that has 5, 6, 7 revenue streams from projects, from filtration, from our land and water. We didn't even talk about the fact that we're building the largest green hydrogen facility in California at Cadiz Ranch.
Can you give us 2 minutes on that? Because
Yeah.
I am really interested. What I'm getting in my mind is a little bit like Virgin, which is a family of brands that do something that can help each other, but effectively are their own separate vertical. Tell me a little bit about that.
You're exactly right with that analogy. So Cadiz has 45,000 acres of land in the
Yeah.
eastern Mojave Desert, right? We have all the land you could. It used to be a railroad stop when they had steam engines that came from the east to the west, and like Texas out to California. The railroads would stop at Cadiz and fill up the tanks for the water through the steam engines. Right. We have 2 major rail lines that cross our land, cross our ranch.
Yeah.
We're sitting at the entrance, at the center of the Southwest natural gas pipeline network that serves the Southwest and all of California. And we have 45,000 acres of land with all the sunshine you could possibly need for solar, all the land you could need to build a big facility like a hydrogen plant. And we've got the only new water supply in the entire Colorado River Basin, and it's extremely high quality water and near limitless supply when it comes to being able to service a plant like hydrogen. So we signed a deal with a Spanish company called RIC Energy to build the first and the largest hydrogen plant, green hydrogen, using clean energy to develop the hydrogen molecules. We can ship it by rail on the rail lines, liquid hydrogen, or we can put a blended product into any of the pipelines that cross our land to serve the markets. So it's the perfect location for hydrogen. The moment we announced the Spanish company, we were immediately asked to enter into a agreement with another company to build an even larger facility at Cadiz. There are synergies co-locating multiple hydrogen projects because of the synergies of moving the hydrogen out.
And are you going to do it?
Yeah, we're going to do it. So I think Cadiz becomes the largest hydrogen production facility in North America.
Peter Lynch wrote a seminal book called One Up on Wall Street, where he describes 7 types of investment: fast growers and stalwarts and dividend payers and so on. And one of the 7 business types that he identified was ones with hidden assets, where there's what you can see, which I think with Cadiz is, we talked about the water and the pipeline, the land rights. But what you've described to me sounds like one of those hidden assets. It's not on the top line of the business, but sits there as a very real asset.
I think that's the way to look at Cadiz. We are an asset-based company, which how do you monetize those assets and make sure that you're generating the greatest value for shareholders from all of your assets? What we are doing now is developing these discrete business models for each of our assets to extract the maximum value for shareholders and monetize them in a way that it's scalable and replicable. And I think we're with 20 years of development behind us, we're on the verge of breaking ground in a way that we're going to be able to bring that value to investors in the near term.
Are you happy with the leaders you have in all of those 7 or so line items on your balance sheet? Because I presume they all have their own leadership mentality. Would that be right?
Yes, we have had some of the top leaders in their fields that have been with Cadiz for a number of years. Water rights is a very, very, very complicated area of law, and a lot of this is about water rights. So we have some of the best water rights negotiators and contractors in the system. I've got folks that work with us that have built and operated some of the most complicated plants. We've got, I think, with ATEC, we've got a genius chemist that is our chief operating officer that is designing these filters, and it's like he's the secret sauce in terms of making this stuff work. So, and I'm pretty good at politics, so I think I'm the secret sauce that allows the company to unlock this. But now that we're really walking the walk in terms of being the good guys and being part of the solution. I'm seeing we're embraced by the local communities. There's a lot of support from the state of California. There's a lot of support and momentum around streamlining construction of these that are coming from the Trump administration. Say what you want, think what you want. There's an emergency, and we've got 2 administrations that will stop at nothing to get through these emergencies. So I think we're in the best possible position.
Very exciting. Finally, Susan, as we are a show by investors for investors, I always like to conclude with a question. And it is, if you were going to a luxury desert island, no internet connection, for the next 20 years, what one stock would you buy before leaving? It can't be Cadiz, by the way, because you're not going to be running it anymore. So, you gotta, we're going to draw on the right side of your brain. Just don't think too hard, but what business do you love? And you're like, yeah, I want to hold this for 20 years.
Well, if it was one, it would, it means presumably I'm already holding Cadiz because it would be
exactly. That's presumed. That's a given. All right. You give me as many names as you like. I just don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm the last person you want to be taking stock advice from, but I think there's 2 areas that I would invest in. One is the trillions of dollars in infrastructure investment that's going to need to be made: water, energy,
Mm.
the grid. They
Yes.
can't, our electric grid can't handle the freezing, the floods, the fires, the extremes. So critical infrastructure, not just water, but also energy, is where private sector investment has a clear field to be able to really invest, put a lot of capital to
Mm.
work cost effectively. So who are the companies that are investing in those, you know, BlackRock,
Yeah.
where they have a lot of money coming in, where you can get really solid returns at an elevated return, because you're not investing in utilities, you're investing in infrastructure that I think where the private sector can give elevated returns, but they're fully baked, right? So I would be looking at the kind of big infrastructure guys that are going to be financing this critical infrastructure, like a BlackRock. The other thing I would be looking at are fuel cells, distributed energy, right? We are entering the era of fuel cells, new technologies, non-combustible technologies. I have seen some amazing new fuel cell technologies that are, or non-combustion engines.
Mm.
And the grid is falling apart. It's not going to be central station over hundreds of miles and of high wire, intensity lines, and then distribution lines. It's going to be distributed energy, and that is and the fuel cells. I would try to get in front of IPOs for fuel cells.
Really?
Yeah, and there's some companies that I think are doing, have great technology that is scalable going
A
forward.
Ballard Power, would that be one? Ballard? No.
That's certainly one. That's certainly one.
Yeah,
And
I invested in them 27 years ago. They say too early is worse than too late. And I, I invested in fuel cells in the 90s. Ballard Power,
it's the perfect time for fuel cells.
interesting.
Solar has gotten. I was there at the beginning of solar. I hate to date myself, but
Yeah.
now, and there were billions and billions
Mm.
of dollars in tax credits and that went into building out the infrastructure. And now solar panels are so cheap, we're
Right.
hitting them with 30% tariffs, right?
Yeah.
And so the era of solar is now baked into our energy economy, right? But fuel cells, now you're at the beginning
Mm. Mm.
of the subsidies and the technology and the tax credits that will help fuel the deployment, right? But these new technologies are the future in terms of our energy grid. So I'd be
Great.
looking at fuel cell
There we go.
technologies.
I will be diving into that rabbit hole in the weeks ahead to find out as many names as I can and research them accordingly. Susan Kennedy, Chair and CEO of Cadiz, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me here on Stock Club today.
It's so great to be here with you. Thank you.